reporter on the Reds, as a reporter on the Bengals, or a reporter on anything and everything. Charlie, welcome to Off the Bench.
How you doing? Good to see you.
If somebody asked you, Charlie, which of those two or any others would you prefer?
Reporter on the Reds and Bengals, I guess I'll take, but just happy to be working for the Inquirer and happy to be talking to you right now.
How many years you been there now?
It's year 3.
Year 3. I mean, it's unbelievable. You do such a great job, and we read your stuff all the time. Let's start with last night. Andrew Abbott. Loved your recap and the way that, oftentimes the write-up will be about the kid, and deservedly so. It was an incredible major league debut. But I love how you broke it down in talking about the visit to the mound by his catcher and what was going on. Walk us through all that, because you were down there in the locker room. You watched the game, and then you were down in the locker room after the game.
Yes, so Andrew Abbott's a guy who rarely walks hitters, but he walked 3 batters in the first inning and a third. And in the second inning, Luke Maile, the Reds' backup catcher, comes out and goes, "All right, Andrew, trust your stuff. You're nibbling. Be the guy who has the fastball that rises through the strike zone at an analytical rate that you rarely see. Be the guy who has a curveball who has a spin rate that you rarely see." After that, Abbott really took that advice of course, it makes sense. All right, you can make that adjustment on the fly, but we've seen a lot of these debuts. Abbott was able to do that in his debut in a way that, Nick Lodolo's debut wasn't the prettiest. Graham Ashcraft's debut wasn't the prettiest. Hunter Green had some ups and downs over the course of his debut, but Abbott really stayed the course. His best inning was his last inning, and he showed exactly the type of guy that, has the Reds viewing him as a top 100 prospect in baseball and a long-term part of their rotation.
All right, I always love getting inside the game inside the game. So let me, though, kind of take that a little further with Abbott and Maile. By the time Abbott got up here, it's not like Maile had a chance to catch him even in a bullpen session. So I'm assuming, and it's assuming, that for Maile, sharp guy, smart guy, knows what he's doing back there. That is without a doubt. He must have watched some kind of video of Abbott, or a lot of video of Abbott before he caught him, to be able to pick up, just a little flaw in his mechanics that he saw.
Yes, so Maile caught him some during spring training. The Reds are really good about incorporating their catchers in the game planning process for the pitchers. They do that just a lot more and give the catchers a lot more of a voice in that process. So Maile really knew what he was seeing and was prepared. He said he noticed in the second inning Abbott was coming slow out of the windup, or Abbott was coming too fast out of the windup, and that his arm was kind of lagging a little bit. He noticed some really small details like that, even though it was just his first time working with Abbott. That's part of what's made Maile such a big addition to the Reds this year. Same with Kirk Casale, having 2 such veteran catchers who just have such a good feel and instinct for pitch calling and what to say during mound visits and in-game adjustments. For a pitching staff as young as the Reds, that kind of stuff really means a lot. That's why backup catcher was one of the maybe the Reds' biggest priority during the offseason, because of moments like you saw with Maile and Abbott yesterday.
All right, then you get to decision time for David Bell, as you got into. Look, I understand a little bit of the analytics. I don't immerse myself in that stuff. I think it's great information to have. But having been around baseball for a while, I think there's something to be said of what your eyes tell you you're watching. Clearly, the Brewers were not getting good swings against Abbott. The only way they were getting on base is if he walked them. He had only allowed 1 base hit. So now key decision time in that 6th inning. You got the heart of the order coming up. The old adage about, let starting pitchers go through a lineup 3 times. He decides this time that he likes what he sees and staying with it.
That was a big moment. That was a really big moment. We've seen it a lot with, less established starting pitchers. We've even seen, Hunter Green and Nick Lodolo and Graham Ashcraft, when he was pitching well, have to earn that opportunity to go through the 3rd time of the order. And yet in Andrew Abbott's major league debut, he didn't just get that opportunity. He came out and with a runner on base threw probably his 2nd best pitch of the game, a curveball strike 3 looking. Like I wrote in my notes, who has curveballs strike 3 looking anymore? We just don't see that a ton, and he got it to get William Contreras out, an all-star catcher. And then his best pitch of the game to strike out Christian Yelich, elevating that fastball, showing that Again, like I mentioned earlier, the unique analytical rise he has on that pitch, getting Yelich to swing under it. Those 2 strikeouts gave David Bell the confidence to stick with Abbott through the rest of the inning. He got a fly out to end it, and literally you couldn't have asked for any more from someone in their first game in the big leagues.
All right, you touched on a couple of other names there, and just bring us up to speed here, Charlie. Any idea, because he sounds like he has no idea, what is going on with Graham Ashcraft?
So Graham Ashcraft throws 3 pitches, and let's do some process of elimination here. There's the slider, which was a pitch that he completely changed during spring training and took Major League Baseball by storm. Maybe one of the best pitches in the league in April. Well, the league adjusted. They realized that especially early in counts, he wasn't throwing it for strikes. So they're just laying off the slider. He's not getting that chase, and that pitch has become less effective. Pitch number 2, his 2-seam fastball. This is the pitch that he added in 2021 to become a guy who was a no-name prospect to a guy who became a big prospect for the Reds. Graham says he has just no feel for his 2-seam anymore. He stopped throwing it. He's trying a new grip out to see if that can save the pitch, but he has lost all feel for that pitch and again has stopped throwing it. So that's 2 out of 3. That leaves the cutter. Now teams are just waiting for the cutter early in the at-bat. They feel like they know what's coming. They know exactly what they want their pitch to be early in the at-bat. And the beauty of his 2-seam is that goes one way and the cutter goes the other way. And now he only has the cutter that goes to his left. So he just has fewer answers. Teams have a better sense of what to expect. He is deep in the adjustment process right now of finding that new grip for his 2-seam fastball. He's kicked around the idea of adding a changeup, and he has to find a way to locate his slider for strikes. That's a lot to do on the fly in the middle of a season. We'll see, what his future in the rotation for the short term looks like. I'm still a big believer in Ashcraft's long-term potential because that cutter is something that, no one else in baseball can quite do what he can, but he is squarely in the middle of kind of a tipping point of his season right now.
All right, now look, I'm not putting these words in your mouth. I say them because I've seen it far too often through 30-plus years in baseball. It's not that teams are lying to you about how healthy guys are, and I know you get into the whole HIPAA thing. I get all that. But I just think that oftentimes they don't tell the full truth, and it doesn't make them bad people. When I see something like this with Hunter Green, my initial skepticism, kicks into high gear. I'm like, wait a minute now. Okay, he's had a bad hip. He's pitched arguably 2 of his best games of the season consecutively, right? Even pitching with a sore hip. It's not like they backed him up 1 or 2 days. They back him up a week. Am I overreacting?
Yeah, he has a bullpen, I believe Thursday or Friday, but I'm pretty sure it's Thursday. Nothing will change between now and then. He's on track to make this start on Sunday, and the only way that could change is if he comes out and throws this bullpen later in the week, and he does, report some more stiffness, some more soreness, then we have something here. But everything I've been told right now is, again, look at the way he pitched most recently. David Bell stressed this multiple times. Everything I've been hearing behind the scenes is that the Reds have confidence that he can, just overcome this like everyone's overcoming some sort of wear and tear over the course of the season. Certainly a little bit of a concern. But again, unless he throws that bullpen later in the week and something bad happens, I have heard that there's no long-term concern yet.
Okay, then there's Lodolo. We initially, and again, this is what, kind of kicks it into gear again. We initially hear it's a calf thing. Then all of a sudden we hear now it's a bone thing right there in the shin area, right? And I've broken that bone a couple times, both of them in there, tibia, fibula. I'm not a professional athlete. I'm a slightly heavy, 59-year-old dude. But I know that that's not an easy injury to come back from. What are you hearing, if anything, about Lodolo?
He's in a scooter. There's no way to, that's the only thing that matters right now. He's not on his feet. He's off his feet. There's a long way to go from being in a scooter to being back on the major league mound. He has left calf tendinosis, which tendinosis compared to tendinitis is a chronic condition. So they're looking at different ways to kind of prevent this from flaring up again in a negative way because it won't just go away. It's had an impact too, or it's one caused the other, or the other caused the other. But the stress reaction in his tibia, either that caused the stress on his calf or the calf caused the stress on his tibia. They're searching for that answer. They're trying to find the root of the problem to make sure it doesn't become a long-term issue. But anytime maybe your best pitcher's been in a boot for a month and on a scooter for a month, that's concerning. The story of Nick Lodolo's season will be this injury and how long it takes to come back from this. And again, there's nothing else to say right now, except that he is a long way from pitching, certainly concerning. The Reds were very frustrated when he got hurt because he is one of their most important players, and they're pitching or playing without him for a while.
All right, look, I would imagine, Charlie, the question you get asked around town, people know who you are. You're in high demand to do a lot of shows like this. I have to believe topic A is Elly De La Cruz. Now, there's been a lot of speculation, when he's coming up. Some thought it might have been on the last road trip. Others thought it might have been on this homestand to start things off against the Brewers. Obviously, that's not happened. Do you think this is a case of they don't think he's ready to come up, or the dilemma they're going to face of who's going to play where once they do bring him up?
I think he's ready. I think Elly De La Cruz is more than good enough to help the Reds win games right now, and that's why I think we'll see him called up any day now within the next week, 2 weeks. I'd be shocked if it wasn't by the end of the road trip. Frankly, I expect sometime between now and the end of that road trip he'll be called up. I do think there are some conversations they have to have and they have to plan for. Elly De La Cruz, when he comes up, since he has such star potential, the entire ecosystem in some ways does change. Elly De La Cruz getting called up impacts Matt McClain and Jonathan India, Nick Senzel and Spencer Steer, and the structure of the lineup and all of these tangible ways. It impacts everyone. And from a preparation standpoint, that takes, preparing. From a conversation standpoint, you want to make sure you have those conversations with the players to be ready for Ellie's call-up. For example, you saw Jonathan India taking ground balls at third base yesterday. He's done that a few times recently. He's getting, more experience in different positions and versatility. If, McClain plays second, India can play third, stuff like that. So they're working through those types of things. That's a very big reason he hasn't been called up yet. We will see him up very soon. There's a plan in place, and they're certainly on the trajectory of Ellie's arrival. That's what they're really preparing for right now.
You really look, Charlie, at all three of these things, and we tend to talk about, I say three areas, not things. Okay, we tend to talk about how the Reds and their system, high level, their system already at the big leagues, they're loaded up with guys who are quote-unquote middle infielders. Some of them can go play third if they need to. McClain and De La Cruz and India have all done that at some point in time in their careers, albeit college or in the minor leagues. You're starting now to get to a point as well, however, where, whatever decision you're going to make about the shortstop and second base, okay, well, let's just assume for a second, India now, you're considering playing him a little bit at third with De La Cruz at short and McClain at second base. Now you get into, though, the second area, which is the corner positions and DH, right? How do you think all of this ultimately works out? Steer was playing very well at third. In spring training, they didn't think so. You reported on this. Now, all of a sudden, the season starts, he was playing pretty well at third. Then all of a sudden, he has to go over to first. Senzel comes into third. You've got Encarnacion Strand, who is, if De La Cruz is hot in AAA, Encarnacion Strand is just as hot as he is, right? 14 bombs, hitting 350, on-base percentage over 400, all these kinds of things. So he's got to be knocking on the door. And then lingering way out there in the woods is Votto, who's out on his rehab. How do you think ultimately, if you were a betting man, and we get to September 1st of this year, so let's do two things here. September 1st of this year, opening day next year. Who is playing where?
September 1st of this year, I think there won't be set starters at most positions. I get the sense that their plan is to rotate, to use the DH, have India play a lot of second still, a bit of third, maybe a bit of try him out at first, play at DH some, and keep him in the lineup every day that way. McClain, I could see him playing, the rest of the starts at second base, a few days a week at short. Elly most days at short, maybe 1 or 2 days or 3 at third. Rotate, keep everyone in the mix, keep your options open, and really prevent any final decisions until you have all of the information, as much of the information as possible. Then when you're looking down the road in the future, when India has a full off season to prepare for a new position, I do get the sense that he could be an impact left fielder. That's something you hear brought up a lot. what India could do in the outfield, especially because they see Matt McLain as a guy who they think can be a Gold Glove second baseman and has an upside defensively there that India doesn't quite have. I do think this is important too to stress, though. Like, I'm very high on McLain, I'm very high on Ellie, I'm very high on Christian Encarnacion Strand. India is the only one who's really hit consistently for a while at the big league level. Of course, some great weeks for Matt McLain, but India by far is the most established guy you have right now. I don't give up on that guy. Make sure you do everything you can to keep that guy in the top of your lineup. You see, the Padres have guys making a lot more money, but you see the Padres moving Tatis to the outfield to try to maximize the roster with the personnel they have and find solutions that way. And Tatis has, continued to provide value in the team that way. India's importance to the Reds relatively is similar, considering the Reds don't have the big name stars. India is basically their big name star in addition to Ellie. I do everything he can to keep him at the top of the order. I'm open-minded to seeing what he looks like in the outfield next season.
Would you be open-minded if some have suggested? It's been out there. I don't know if India's talked about it or not, but, once you get an eye on all these guys, you consider trading India?
No one's untradeable. The Twins traded Arraez to the Marlins last offseason for Pablo Lopez, a really good top of the rotation starter. And, everyone has their value. I think both Miami and Minnesota are pleased with the results of that trade. Maybe the Reds do have a need in the outfield long term, or you always need another top of the rotation starter. But like I was saying earlier, India is the only guy who's been really good for a while of this group. He does have the leadership role in the team. He does have the presence. Spencer Steer said the other day, India is the guy who establishes the identity that we're trying to play with and leads the Reds in that way. I do everything I can to keep that guy, even if it does mean changing positions. But certainly, again, no one is untradeable. And I'll be interested to see, that will be the defining question of the Reds offseason, whether it's a position change from India, someone else makes a position change, or if trade conversations pick up.
All right, last thing I want to ask you about the Reds. How long, or perhaps they're there already, how long do you start getting worried about Tyler Stevenson? Look, he can have a game here or there where he gets a hit or a couple of hits, but let's be honest about it. This has not been good from what you expected. And expectations are dangerous, especially as they pertain to young players. But when you start talking about a guy who loves to catch, got injured catching, with a concussion, and then he got hit, and that was a freak play that knocked him out for the year last year. But, look, the bottom line is he's always been a catcher. He likes being a catcher. We all understand why they're doing what they're doing, whether it's DHing occasionally, not as many games behind the plate, playing a little bit of first base, all those kinds of things. But when do you think, or are they there already, about getting concerned about his offense?
I don't think there's long-term concern, but there is short-term concern. We know this because they entered the year with a very concrete plan for Tyler Stevenson, and that plan changed. He was originally supposed to play play first, 3 out of 10 days, basically. They've had Tyler stop working at first base. He has not taken ground balls there anymore. He hasn't played there since April, and that's because they want him focusing on his catching and his hitting. And that is a sign to me that, they want him to get more focus and more opportunity to improve those specific areas of his game, because what they were doing wasn't working. He just hasn't looked like himself. He's a guy who, when he's at his best, just looks more comfortable at the plate than anybody, and he just hasn't quite been that guy recently. He's working on some adjustments. He's trying to lay off the inside pitch. I still think he's their catcher of the future, but this is a big couple months from him to try to get that confidence back and become the guy he was last year.
All right, look, you also have your finger on the pulse of the Bengals. And, look, we had James Rapien on yesterday. We talked about it for a long time here. He doesn't have to be here. But what are your thoughts of this whole Jonah Williams thing?
I think Jonah Williams has become underrated. We forget how middle of the road the Bengals right tackles have been, how they've rotated 30 to 32-year-olds who have been inconsistent over the course of their career. What if the Bengals went out and signed a guy who was a former first-round pick entering his 5th year in the league, someone who, is really a strength is the way he understands the playbook and the scheme and blitz pickups and all that kind of stuff, someone who has played solid enough while not showing star power or really a ton of high-end consistency against the best players in the league. But there are only 5 right tackles in the league you can make that case for. I think he by far is the favorite to be the Bengals starting right tackle right now. He gives them, again, some traits that they haven't had at right tackle in a while. And, I expect him to be at mandatory minicamp coming up next week. I expect him to be invested. It's a contract year for him, too, heading into the regular season. And, again, if Jonah Williams is the guy you're worried about, Jonah Williams 2 years ago was the guy you were least worried about. So that shows you how much the line as a whole has improved.
All right, and that's 100% accurate. Couldn't agree more about that. But it is a new position for him. And so, look, I don't know. We've had guys on this program. We had on Willie Anderson last week, and he said that move from one tackle to the other tackle spot is a big deal, especially as it pertains to your brain and your left foot on one side, your right foot on the other. Willie said that, he would talk to guys whose bodies all of a sudden started to change or break down because they were using muscles in different parts of their body on one side that they weren't necessarily using on the other side. The whole brain aspect of all of that. I mean, he got pretty deep in the woods on this stuff. So for me, and again, it's just my opinion, I just think there's been a goal. Not to say you can't make up for it. I just think there's been some lost time here on some things that he could have and should have been doing. Maybe he's built up enough equity down there with his teammates where they're just like, okay, this is the business of football. We ain't worried about it.
That's fair, but life's all about what you're willing to put up with, right? And, last year the Bengals had a right tackle in Lyle Collins who didn't do anything in the training, basically anything in all of training camp because he had back issues. And you can make the same case, about the mental and physical hurdles of coming back from that. You had a guy in Riley Reif in 2021 who was playing through all sorts of injuries over the course of the season. In 2020, it was Bobby Hart, who wasn't good. And if you would rank the problems, I would take the guy who's moving to a new position over the guy who missed all of training camp, over the guy who wasn't good. When you're ranking problems and concerns, I would take the problems or issues or concerns that come with Jonah because, frankly, they're less concerning to me than the others. And by the way, the other two guys he's competing with, one of them's Collins coming off a torn ACL. We'll see when he practices at any point in training camp. The other's Jackson Carman, who's making that exact same position change. So I don't think there's a better, more comfortable answer at right tackle than Jonah Williams, and I don't think they've had a more comfortable answer at right tackle in a couple of years.
All right, last thing I'm going to ask you, my friends here in the chat that are watching our show every single day, they told me I'm tired for asking this question, but I'm going to continue to ask it because I like hearing different opinions on this, okay? Are the Bengals better today on paper than they were, and I'm not going to say the AFC Championship game because they had all the offensive linemen that were hurt, but that group that started 15 straight games together. Are the Bengals better today than they were last year?
Depends on how good Nick Scott and Dax Hill are.
Yep.
That, to me, is the most intriguing story of the season. Dax actually offers some playmaking and some turnover possibilities that the Bengals didn't have. But, when you're in the league of where you're not really competing in the AFC North, you're in your own division with Mahomes, Allen, the Eagles, the 49ers, and the other Super Bowl contenders. How you do against the elite quarterbacks will shape your season. Jesse Bates and Von Bell were as good against elite quarterbacks as any safety duo in all of football. That's my biggest question when I, really watch them in full pads in training camp, how quickly they hit the ground running. Big picture, if I were to guess now, I'd say yeah, especially because they are better, especially because, when the Bengals lost last year, take out the Ravens game in week 5, they lost to the Steelers in week 1 because they couldn't block. They lost to the Cowboys the next week because they couldn't block. They lost to the Browns in the middle of the season because they couldn't block. They lost to the Chiefs in the AFC title game because they couldn't block Chris Jones. Their line is much better now. And so for all that, I would guess the Bengals would be better. But again, the X factor is those two safeties.
All right. Charlie, you're awesome, man. I'd love to have you come back. Thanks so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day and enjoy the ball game tonight.
Thanks, you too.